Welcome to the Rare History Channel. Top 11 Interesting Facts about Malcolm X. Malcolm X, whose original name was Malcolm Little, was an African-American Muslim minister and human rights activist. He was a prominent figure during the civil rights movement. He was a spokesman for the Nation of Islam until 1964. He was a vocal advocate for black empowerment and the promotion of Islam within the black community. Fact number 1. Malcolm X wasn't his birth name. Malcolm X's birth name was Malcolm Little. He was born on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, and he was the fourth of 8 siblings. His parents were Louise Helen Little and Earl Little. They inculcated self-reliance and black pride in their children. Like many black Americans, Malcolm's roots were obscured by the slave trade that stripped him of his ancestral last name. In 1950, he started signing his name as Malcolm X, viewing the surname Little as another tool of oppression. In his autobiography, Malcolm wrote, "For me, my ex replaced the white slave master name of Little which they had imposed upon my paternal forebears." Number 2. Malcolm X grew up in foster homes. When Malcolm was 6, his father died in what has been officially ruled a streetcar accident. To make ends meet and provide for her children, Louise rented out part of her garden. In 1937, a man Louise had been dating vanished from her life when she became pregnant with his child. In late 1938, she had a nervous breakdown and was committed to Kalamazoo State Hospital. The children were separated and sent to foster homes. Number 3. Malcolm X dropped out of school after his teacher told him black people can't be lawyers. Malcolm was very bright and academically focused. He was also quite popular, and in the second half of his 7th grade year, in a class where he was the only black student, he was elected class president. However, after graduating from junior high the following year, he dropped out of school entirely. He attributed this decision in part to a painful conversation he had with his English teacher. When Malcolm confided that he'd thought about becoming a lawyer, the teacher told him that practicing law, his aspiration at the time, was no realistic goal for a nigger. Malcolm X recalled feeling that the white world offered no place for a career-oriented black man, regardless of talent. Number 4. Malcolm X went to prison for committing a series of burglaries. In 1943, Malcolm X moved from Boston to Harlem in New York City. There he embraced the vibrant and often seedy nightlife, frequenting dance halls, clubs, and gambling dens. To support his lifestyle, he became involved in criminal activities, including drug dealing, gambling, pimping, robbery, and racketeering. In late 1945, Malcolm returned to Boston, where he and 4 accomplices committed a series of burglaries targeting wealthy white families. In 1946, he was arrested while picking up a stolen watch he had left at a shop for repairs. In February, he began serving an 8 to 10-year sentence at Charlestown State Prison for larceny and breaking. Number 5. Malcolm converted to Islam while in prison. Islam is an Abrahamic, monotheistic, and universal religion teaching that Muhammad is a messenger of God. It is the world's second largest religion with 1.9 billion followers or 24.9% of the world's population, known as Muslims. Malcolm X spent much of his time in prison reading and educating himself. He took several college courses through the mail, including one in Latin. His decision to join the Islam Nation also was influenced by discussions with his brother Reginald, who had become a member in Detroit and who was incarcerated with Malcolm in the Norfolk prison colony in Massachusetts in 1948. Malcolm quit smoking and gambling and refused to eat pork in keeping with the nation's dietary restrictions. Number 6. Malcolm transformed the Nation of Islam from little-known movement into national phenomenon. After 7 years in prison, Malcolm was released in 1952. It is during this time that he helped to lead the Nation of Islam during the period of its greatest growth and influence. He met Elijah Muhammad in Chicago in 1952 and then began organizing temples for the nation in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston and in cities in the South. At this time, the Nation of Islam was still a tiny organization with only a few hundred members. However, it started to gain an increasing number of followers, mainly African Americans in prison who were lost and in need of guidance. Part of the religion involved preaching adherence to a stringent moral code, and members were encouraged only to be reliant on themselves and their fellow African Americans. Number 7. Malcolm reached black pride and separation of the races. Malcolm X was opposed to integration. Rather than integrate, the Nation of Islam wanted black Americans to create their schools, churches, and supply networks. Malcolm promoted the concept of separation from white society and opposed the mainstream civil rights movement for its emphasis on integration. He gave forceful sermons about black pride, self-reliance, and the belief that freedom and survival could come only from the strict separation of the races. He believed that the idea of integration in which whites and blacks could live side by side in harmony and equality was a fantasy. Number 8. Malcolm X opposed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. During this time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. represented the face of America's mainstream civil rights movement. Malcolm, however, disparaged many of King's ideas, including racial integration and nonviolent resistance to gain equality and acceptance. He also criticized the mainstream civil rights movement. He challenged Martin Luther King Jr.'s central notions of integration and nonviolence. In contrast to King's strategy of nonviolence, civil disobedience, and redemptive suffering, Malcolm urged his followers to defend themselves by any means necessary. The message he delivered on behalf of the Nation of Islam was very different from the one preached by Martin Luther King Jr. Number 9. JFK's assassination led to Malcolm X's ouster from the Nation of Islam. In 1964, Malcolm X split from the Nation of Islam. For some time, there had been rumors that Elijah Muhammad had become jealous and fearful of Malcolm's increasing influence. This made him believe that he might try to take over his organization. Their relationship continued to fracture due to allegations of sexual misconduct by the Nation of Islam leader. Things came to head shortly after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963. Asked by a reporter for his comments, Malcolm said it was a case of the chickens coming home to roost. The remarks prompted widespread public outcry. The Nation of Islam, which had sent a message of condolence to the Kennedy family and ordered its ministers not to comment on the assassination, publicly censured Malcolm X. He retained his post and rank as a minister, but was prohibited from public speaking for 90 days. Number 10. The FBI followed his every move. As a prisoner in 1950, Malcolm wrote a letter to President Harry Truman in which he declared himself a communist opposed to the Korean War. This brought him to the attention of the FBI, which began surveillance that would last until his death. In one document that has since come to light, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover told the agency's New York office to do something about Malcolm X. Number 11. Malcolm was assassinated in 1965. His killers were from the Nation of Islam. In 1964, Malcolm X publicly announced his break from the Nation of Islam. He changed his name to El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz and converted to traditional Islam. Then, he started speaking out against the nation and criticized Muhammad for his infidelities when he had previously remained silent. Malcolm was well aware that the Nation of Islam had designs on his life, and on February 19, 1965, he told an interviewer named Gordon Parks that the NOI was actively trying to murder him. The end came in New York just 2 days later when Malcolm appeared at 125 Th Street's Alhambra Ballroom. Just as he was about to speak, a fight started to break out in the front row. 3 men pulled out guns and started shooting. Malcolm was shot 21 times and was pronounced dead just an hour later.